Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat
Boker
Shalom.
Tov. It's really such a bracha, such a blessing to be back in the embrace of this amazing community. You've been so generous and open-hearted this time as the last time we came from Hebrew College and joined you here. And we're so grateful that you exist and that you are honoring us again by welcoming us. So it's particularly wonderful to be here this Shabbat when these two moments converge on our sacred calendar. The holiday of Tu B'Shvat, which we celebrated last night with a beautiful and freilich Tu B'Shvat Seder. And of course this morning, the special Sabbath of Song, Shabbat Shirah, which we'll mark in a few moments by chanting the Song of the Sea. So it's tempting to think about this morning's Torah portion really as the hinge, sort of the pivot point on which the whole story of the Exodus swings. The story that began with a cry, that deep, inarticulate cry of slaves, so beaten down that they couldn't muster a protest or even a prayer, now culminates in song. It's tempting to see this as the big turning point, the great, miraculous crossing over when we finally leave Egypt behind and we step gratefully, joyfully, triumphantly into the wilderness with our sights steady on the promised land. It would be tempting, of course, if we didn't know better. And if we didn't know that every journey out of bondage toward liberation, out of Egypt toward the promised land, is a complex and circuitous one, with twists and turns and stops and starts, with discouraging setbacks and unanticipated blessings, with moments of possibility and hope and renewal just when we least expect them. So our route out of Egypt is neither short nor straightforward. It's long and indirect. And apparently it needs to be that way. We learn in the very opening verses of this morning's parasha. Listen to the words for a minute. When it came to pass that Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by way of the land of the Philistines, although it was closer. For God said, the people may have a change of heart when they see war and return to Egypt. And then it says, Vayasev Elohim et ha'am. So God led the people round about, the scenic route. These verses may tell us something about the tribal territories of the ancient Near East, but I think they tell us a lot more about the inner landscape of the human heart. We are changeable, mysterious even to ourselves. We may feel great hope one moment and overwhelming hopelessness the next. God knows this about us, knows how quickly fear can make us lose faith and undermine our sense of fellowship, knows that the sheer terror of the unfamiliar can be so unbearable that within days, hours, minutes of experiencing a liberation we never imagined possible, we may be ready to give up, turn back, opt for the certainties of slavery over the insecurities of freedom. And of course, shortly after the Israelites leave Egypt, they find themselves in what seems quite objectively to be a desperate situation. They've witnessed great signs and wonders. They've survived that night of the final passage out of Egypt. And then after a brief journey, they find themselves caught between the pursuing Egyptian army and the seemingly impassable sea. When I was growing up, actually, when we were growing up in my house, and whenever things were looking a little bit dire, or we were feeling hopeless about some situation or another, my mother would say to us, Imagine how the Israelites felt at the edge of the sea, which we didn't always fully appreciate as a... Anyway, so they believe they're trapped, and they panic, of course. Vayir'u me'od vayitzaku b'nei Yisrael el Adonai. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to Adonai. And they also said to Moses, was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us here, to die here? What have you done to us? So Moses attempts to reassure the people in this moment, says, have no fear. The Lord will battle for you. Hold your peace. And then there's this very strange and unexpected response from God to Moses. God says, Ma titzak elai. What are you crying out to me for? Tell the people to go forward. And it's very bewildering. It's interesting, really, to think about what exactly has Moses done wrong here? Why does God respond in this way? So there's a wonderful midrash in Shmot Rabbah, which uses this moment as an opportunity to reflect on God as Shomea Tfilah, God as the one who hears prayer. And this is what it says. I'm quoting now. In the hour that Israel prays, you do not find that everyone prays as one. No kidding. But rather each and every community prays in its own way and time. This congregation first, and after that another congregation, and after all the congregations have finished all of their prayers, the angel appointed over all tefillot gathers up all the prayers that all of the congregations have prayed and makes out of them a crown and places it upon the head of the Holy Blessed One. Davar acher, another interpretation. A human being cannot hear a conversation of two people speaking at once. But the Holy Blessed One is not like that. Everyone is praying at the same time, and God can hear and receive all of those prayers. The implication of the Midrash is that God rebukes Moshe at the shores of the sea because Moshe has underestimated God's capacity to hear the cacophony of prayers in that moment. Moshe has underestimated God. This is the God who is Shomea Tfilah. This is the God who hears all prayers. In this moment of extraordinary chaos, we're asked to imagine a God who hears and receives the cries of each and every person, a God who wears a crown of human longing and praise. Contrast just for a moment this divine capacity to sustain contradiction, as described in the Midrash, with Pharaoh's brutal and life-denying efforts to impose a worldview that erases all paradox and ambiguity. In Pharaoh's world, you are either Egyptian or Israelite, slave or master. Let us not trouble ourselves with the shared humanity that blurs those distinctions. The idea that there could be an Israelite, a Yosef, a Joseph, who is somehow both other and one of us, who comes from outside of us, but helps save us from ourselves. This Pharaoh does not know him, does not know Yosef. This Pharaoh cannot even imagine or permit the possibility of such ambiguity. You are either a boy or a girl, and this determines whether you will live or die. You are either safe or dangerous. Little did Pharaoh understand how dangerous the women, Shifra, Pua, Yocheved, Miriam, his own daughter, would be, how disruptive of this world of sharp distinctions he sought to impose. To sharpen the contrast between Pharaoh's world of harsh distinctions and the divine capacity to hear and hold multiple and even competing truths and prayers. Consider just one more brief midrash, the one about the angels asking to sing while the Egyptians were drowning in the sea. I confess that after hearing this midrash cited at so many Pesach Seders for so many years, it had become a little bit of a sort of smug, self-congratulatory cliche to me. You know, we're so amazing because we take those drops of wine out of our glasses at each of the plagues. But then I went back and looked at the story in its original context, and I just want to share it with you briefly, this version, Talmudic version. When the Holy One was about to drown the Egyptians in the sea, Uzzah, heavenly prince of Egypt, rose up and prostrated himself before the Holy One, saying, "Master of the universe, you created the world by the measure of mercy. Why then do you wish to drown my children?" The Holy One gathered the entire heavenly household and said to them, "You be the judge between me and Uzzah, prince of Egypt." At that, the heavenly princes of the other nations began to speak up in behalf of Egypt. When Michael, the heavenly prince of Israel, perceived this, he gave the sign to Gabriel, who in one swoop darted down to Egypt, where he pulled out a brick with its clay enclosing a dead infant who had been buried alive in the structure. He then came back, stood before the Holy One, and said, "Master of the universe, thus did the Egyptians enslave your children." Whereupon the Holy One sat in judgment over the Egyptians in accord with the measure of justice and drowned them in the sea. And then, in that instant, says the Midrash, the ministering angels wished to utter song before the Holy One. But God rebuked them, saying, "The works of my hands are drowning in the sea, and you would utter song in my presence?" The angels seem to mirror our own changeable hearts, buffeted by their competing feelings of sympathy and horror, incapable of both judging and showing compassion at once. But we worship the God that can hold all this. The horror of the infant enclosed in brick, whose silenced cry calls out for judgment. Side by side, in the same instant, with the helplessness of those other children, also God's own, whose drowning may be just, but is surely no cause for joy. According to the Midrash, while the angels are told to be silent, the children of Israel are actually permitted to sing. God understands our limits. It's true. How dare we rejoice? And it's also true. In that moment when our lives have been given back to us, how can we not rejoice? We humans are allowed to sing, but the Midrash ensures that our own song forever contains an echo of all those other cries. Similarly, by the way, in our Haftarah for this morning, in Shirat Devorah, in the Song of Deborah, it carries the echoes, the haunting sound of Sisra's mother, the mother of our enemy, sighing, moaning, waiting for her son to come home from battle when we know that he won't. The Song of Deborah, the Song of the Sea, their redemptive power lies precisely in the fact, I think, that they do not silence or erase these contradictions that are so difficult for us to bear. Shirah, poetry, song, at its deepest and most true, gives voice to the paradoxes of the human heart. It carries us beyond the brittle choice of either this or that, either us or them, to the more subtle and supple truthfulness of both this and that, to the expansive ground of merchavya, where there is room for both us and them, for a more spacious we. David spoke beautifully last night about the tensions that we must hold as we try to find our way forward in these troubled times. It was not incidental, I think, that he invited us to sing our way through, evoking the image of the walls of water towering on both sides of us, that miminam o mismolam. As we struggle to leave behind the Metzarim, the oppressive, constricting places that narrow our imaginations, may we open our hearts to the cacophony of hopes and prayers that fill this room and every room. An ancient Chinese proverb teaches, the bird does not sing because she has an answer. She sings because she has a song. May we keep singing, not because we have all the answers, but because we have a song, each of us alone and all of us together. Songs of brokenness and beauty and love and sorrow and longing and praise. And may our songs be lifted up, may our prayers be lifted up on the wings of angels and carried to the Holy One of Blessing. Amen.